what's going on and a precise goal in mind. A news team is a whole flock of people who spend a lot of time getting there and having coffee and running back to get their boots and forgetting a battery and all that sort of thing. And it's not necessarily news, but it's not necessarily good television either. And hell, we ought to be able to do better than that. This whole thing of the science of wildlife films, Dione, I don't know if she's in here, but she's pointed out a couple of days ago on one of these that maybe it was during judging, that this thing about the broadcast product, the thing that's made for broadcasting. That's one type of wildlife on film. And of course, Time Life was also that type, but there's some complaints about it. News is a different thing. The home video is a different thing. People have different standards for what they're producing for home video. Another type of effort in these films is out and out propaganda. It might be good propaganda, it might be bad propaganda. But it could, film can go that way. It can be advocacy. It can be good advocacy. It can be bad advocacy. Ads. The objective in an ad is to sell a product, not to show good biology. And sometimes there's some pretty bad things in ads. We will add a category in the future. And of course, there's people who deliberately put misinformation in films. There's a lot of that going on. Inadvertently, some of it gets in on purpose. Lots of it gets in. A lot of it is neutral. Doesn't matter that much. Trying to show something, or you're trying to cut the length or something, and it's not a straight story. We could correct a lot of these things. We could monitor a lot of these things. We could guide ourselves better in a lot of these problems. But will we? We could correct the situation in schools in terms of what they've got. District 1 here in Missoula, 17 schools, pretty much fat cat schools compared to schools elsewhere around the state. Every single one of them has about a $14,000 video camera in their possession. You know where the video camera is? Locked in the storage room. There are only 2 people have a key to it. That's the janitor and the principal. The principal won't let the teachers or the students use it because it's worth too much money, So it sits on the shelf. And I guess when it's out of date, nobody wants it. You can get it for $35. They'll sell it again. But somehow we got to get that camera out of the closet, just like lots of people want to get out of the closet these days. Get it in the teacher's hands. But teachers got to know how to use it. And teachers got to know how to teach with it. We could do that. We're not doing it. We could do that. The scariest thing of all in all of this, in my mind, is this linkage of the incredible capabilities of television, which is changing so fast that it's much different right now than it was 8 o'clock this morning. And the fact that that machine over there can be linked with essentially any knowledge in the world that you want to link it with. And it can be linked instantaneously. And people can be watching stuff that's live, and it's been fixed. Public doesn't know that. You guys probably all know that. Public doesn't know that. When it comes to an advertisement, they don't care. They say, hey, they're just trying to sell me something. But when it comes to a lot of other kinds of information, this is very, very serious thing. And that capability is changing and improving so rapidly that when you think about all these problems that John and I have been kicking around here, it's mighty scary. So I'm always the optimist until 11 a.m. From 11 o'clock on, I never see any chance in hell if I was correct in this sort of thing. But I will hit the deck tomorrow morning, ready to take it on. So, John, do you have anything to add? or
Yeah,
comment?
people,
You want to give me
well, I
how
mean,
about something?
you've said many very interesting things. There's one thing I would like just to indicate, which I should do, and that is that in the Natural History Unit, at least on the subject of violence on the screen, that we do have very strict guidelines which have evolved from, if you like, the paper that I wrote. Basically, no predation at all on children's programs, not even insects, if possible. Furthermore, that as in quotes, violence is only a small proportion of any animal's activities, then this should be kept in proportion, if you like, to the programs themselves, and that producers have to hold in check any temptation to sort of overemphasize or linger on sort of dramatic action of hunting and killing, especially in programs, say, about East Africa. And then also that we tend to shy away from detailed illustrations of kills. And again, this is really quite important, because a lot of kills are actually very messy. That our Natural History Unit library is littered, is full of scenes and off-cut material from Life on Earth, Trials of Life, Day of the Zebra, where quite honestly you'd be doing no one any favours to show what happens. Buffalo being eaten alive with its guts everywhere and still mooing, and sort of things like that often happens. But we use a system of kind of self-censorship here, so that with these kind of guidelines, we do try in the Natural History Unit to keep these things in balance and to use our judgment. Just be on the floor.
Any questions, comments?
Why the difference in your culture versus ours, do you think? How can you do that?
Violent society here in the States, isn't it? Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe. That's right. Well, I know. I mean, the thing is that whatever happens over here tends to sooner or later come to Europe, and I think generally your entertainment films on television anyway are far more violent than we would put out. And a lot of episodes of Miami Vice and so on have not been shown on BBC, and maybe because of the preoccupation on sort of high impact, which violence lends itself for in a multi-channel situation where there's a lot of competition to keep your eyeballs on one channel. Maybe the audience over here has become sort of blasé about it, more so than say in the United Kingdom, where television has been sort of more strictly controlled. I'm not totally aware of the cinema. I think that, although we've got in quotes a censor who actually can whip things out of films if he thinks they're too violent or too sexual or explicit or whatever, in cinemas, I'm not aware of whether this is actually important, and whether scenes are cut out for cinema. It seems to me that some feature films are much more explicit than anything that occurs on television. When they occur ultimately on television, then there are scenes which are at least snipped, and the sort of the drama is slightly, or the heat is taken out of them. And there's certainly lots of video nasties which have been banned in the United Kingdom. But there again, on the continent of Europe, everything goes, as you know. I mean,
a couple of comments. The first one is, I never thought I would come to his defense, but I have to confess to hiding behind Farley Mowatt's misinformation on one occasion. Several years ago, I had a couple of Salukis that I was walking along the beach in Vancouver, and over the hill came a lady jogger, and she jogged right down to talk to these magnificent-looking beasts, whose heads, of course, were just about right at crotch level. So into the crotch went the head of one dog, who then quietly walked round behind her, and to my horror lifted his leg and sent a stream of urine down her leg into her running shoe. Must have felt quite good, because it was a moment or two before she leapt backwards. And then of course I was absolutely horrified, and then she apologized to me. She said, "Oh my God, what did I do to upset him?" so very quietly said, excuse me. And she said, oh yes, I've read Farley Mowat. I know I must have upset him. Because I'm now trying to swallow my tongue because I'm trying not to laugh. But realised that had I done so, I would have been in the problem that he so kindly got me out of. And she disappeared off over the hill and I never saw her again, thank God. But your talk about professional biologists. I'm a veterinary surgeon and I have worked for many years trying to get veterinarians more involved in the media. And after several years of dragging a rock uphill, decided that it wasn't worth the effort because unfortunately a lot of professional quote-unquote scientists are so wound up in the scientific method and having absolutely everything they say quoted verbatim, and if it isn't, perhaps because they didn't say it quite right in the first place or whatever, they're absolutely terrified of being quoted or being seen, and I find it's very hard and very difficult to get them involved. So when there are biologists and when there are veterinary surgeons who want to get involved in this thing, it would be nice if they would be more embraced. Vancouver, as a lot of you know, is quite now a motion picture center. A lot of features, movies of the weeks, that sort of thing. And I've often been approached for the loan of pieces of equipment. But whenever I've offered technical advice, it's always been eschewed, not needed, not necessary, they know how to do it all. So it's really quite interesting. It's no wonder so many things are in fact factual, even when I volunteered my services, something I rarely do nowadays, but I've done in the past. So it's really interesting in terms of trying to get the correct information out there.
When you were talking about sort of sex and violence and there being this market for it and things getting, produced and sold that way because of it, my own personal activism came from, to me, the act of falling in love, and the people I know who were real involved in environmentalism. To me, it comes from falling in love with like a place or falling in love with a species, like my friend the purple martin man. And when I think about the realm of the Russian bear, I think of that as like a love story, that its passion of place was very contagious. And when I look at, I've watched maybe 15 hours of film since I've been here, and my favorite one is the kangaroo one, and that is sort of what I would call a love story too. And do you think that there's sort of not a market for things that are just wonderful stories about wildlife?
No, of course not. I mean, I've just, in order to make a case, I mean, I've slightly exaggerated the situation. I've just pointed to certain dangers that I see. But I can tell you one thing, that if I was going to make a film on, say, great white sharks, and that is happening in Bristol in cooperation, I think, with National Geographic. That would certainly be, and I wanted a huge budget for it, way, stratospheric budget. I would much more easily get that than if I was going to make a lyrical film about butterflies. And I wouldn't get anywhere. I reckon subject to story and so on and so forth. But I would guess that I'd be very difficult to raise money in the States if I was going to make a film about butterflies, only insofar that they're eaten by birds. Maybe, I don't know. I know. Can I just make a point? I mean, Dee might like to come in on this. And maybe National Geographic, because certainly we work very closely with scientists. Certainly, I think the key to the success, it seems to me, of any good, robust natural history film is actually some kind of relationship between the producers and the people that really understand and know what's going on. I mean, a huge number of experts helped us on Trials of Life, and certainly Russian scientists on realms of the Russian bear. And I would certainly not eschew advice. I mean, I might say, look, ultimately it's up to me, and you're not going to tell me how to make this film, but I want us to cooperate to get the best out of what we're doing. Wouldn't that be right, Dee?
That's always true. I mean, I don't think you can make a good natural history film unless you're actually working hand in glove. I mean, I think it was you guys who taught me that to make a good natural history film, you need a good camera person, a good director, and a good scientist. And it's that lovely golden triangle that makes it work. Going back to that kangaroo film, those kangaroos were acclimated by scientists who've been working on that group for 15 years. Now, you'll notice that they were very careful never to say where that location was. They didn't actually show very much of the the location, because those scientists have been going down there, they could walk up to those kangaroos, they could do anything, and they just didn't want anybody else interfering with those guys. Those filmmakers could never have made that film anywhere else in Australia. There's no way you could walk up to a grey kangaroo, because they'd expect that they'd be shot. I mean, I'm sure they would. So it's only because of the scientists that film got made.
I think you might be just taking me a little out of context. That perhaps I didn't make it clear. If I did say motion pictures, movie of the week's feature type things, when I made that point about them not winning any advice, I think that's a totally different thing. Than,
Yeah, but you chap effectively said that, didn't you?
Yeah,
That there's this
I know.
battle between scientists and filmmakers.
Yeah, I'm not saying that a lot of people aren't doing it right either. It's like, you know, like I was saying earlier, there's been a lot of improvement. There's still a lot of problems. And, you know, I've known all along, they do a real good job in terms of, you know, a lot of them are biologists even. And, but there's a lot of people out there who don't have the knowledge, who make wildlife films. It's like with the time life. I'm not so much worried about time life. What I'm fearing is what they're going to trigger, you know. The really unethical people who will, you know, the poachers are going to come along. And then there's a lot of people who, perfectly honest, but, you know, just don't have the capability to do the consultations and find the people and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of it where there isn't any consultation, and there's a lot of misinformation. There's some, I can think of a series that's been on public television for several years. It's off now, but, you know, it wasn't biology. It was what the host thought biology was. It didn't come even close to biology. And those kinds of things, public watches them too, and there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there, despite the good efforts of the people who are trying hard. I wasn't criticizing people who are trying hard, but
yeah, can I just butt in? I mean, isn't this so of life in general? I mean, are you after a utopian sort of a situation of total perfectness? Because I mean, there are a lot of lousy drama producers and lousy singers, and you know, this is one of the ways in which we can pick out, you know, the quality from the rather poor. Does this matter that there are some filmmakers that are really not getting it right?
yeah, I think so. In terms of wildlife film, the wildlife film, face it, it's a different kind of film. A wildlife film, for a lot of people, is nature and is biology, and it's fast becoming, like Dione says, it's almost all animal behavior. It is science. We used to drag things in and put them in museums, and we learn about animals that way. Then we wrote books about them during the literary phase of learning, and you could read all the books in the world, and we learned that way. Then we came up with a scientific modern method of learning, which is you study things for many, many years. You spend 4 or 5 years editing it. You get it published in a magazine. 15 years later, it appears in a book. It's very accurate because of the whole system we go through. Well, then all of a sudden, here comes the mass media and video, and then next thing you know, they're into wildlife. And now a lot of the films are, in fact, scientific documentation, and people are turning to the films. But we're not preparing the films the way you prepare information. I, as a scientist, I can't run out this afternoon and get some information and have it on the news tonight. It's going to take me many years to prove that I'm right, and prove that I saw what I saw before it's going to get into a journal. And then 15 years later, it might be in a textbook. And what I'm saying is that now people are turning more and more to films in the wildlife area. We have to say, okay, this is a different kind of film. We have to be more careful about it. And I think we could do this, follow the same kinds of principles, you know. Sure, the news is going to be the news, but if you're doing a documentary, I have nothing against fake scenes. If you document it, say, okay, animals do this, we couldn't film it, so we set it up, so we wanted to teach you that. That's perfectly fine. But, you know, I should say, hey, Gary, back in Ohio or in Pennsylvania found this, and so found that. Here's why we know this is true. And I think we'd end up with better films like that. The methodology is there, and I'm saying that with wildlife films, we should adopt some of that methodology because it is nature. A lot of people don't touch and feel. Their life is moving from the 20th apartment or story up to the 80th and then back down to the 3rd in old age. And they've got ceramic animals and bronze birds and such and TV. They don't touch the real world, and we need to get people in touch with the real world via video or via television. I think we got a whole different kettle of fish here with wildlife films than we do with ordinary television. That probably sounds weird, but that's how I see it as a wildlife.
I'm not sure that they're scientific documents. We could debate that one. Just
I
sorry.
really disagree with that. I mean, do you think anybody could really use a wildlife film? I mean, you don't know where it was shot or what the time sequence was, and how could you use it to actually study the way animals behave? I'm really skeptical.
Well, people are doing it, is my point. People don't go to the library for 2 weeks.
Wildlife film footage to really study mammal biology.
A lot of behavioral research is done with film because you can slow it down, you can stop it, and you can see these details you couldn't possibly
Yeah,
see.
it's not done with these wildlife produced films. It's done with live film. You take hour after hour monitoring some subject and then you don't produce it.
But a lot of it turns up in the festival as literally a scientific documentation. It's never been seen before until you see it in a festival. And that's happening, and I think we've got to start dealing with it.
I think what a well-made natural history film can do is to give you a kind of a qualitative sort of view of a reflection of, if you like, the natural world. But I actually do think that the techniques of filmmaking have got inbuilt sort of distortions, which I think from the scientific point of view actually will always make them less not valuable. I mean, there's no way you could study elephant behavior just by looking at a film on elephants, for Christ's sake.
Well, just look ahead 10 years, though. What people are doing now, taking 2 years to do it, 10 years from now, it's going to be coming out of the tube live. You're going to be able to sit there with the switch and say, what's going on in the Great Barrier Reef? And then I wonder what the polar bear is doing at Churchill. I wonder what's going on with the, whatever critter you want. That's coming down the pike real fast, and we aren't ready for it. That's where people aren't going to go to the library and spend 2 weeks finding out about crocodiles. They're going to hit the damn switch and watch crocodiles themselves. We're going back literally to an oral television tradition, I think, and we're not ready for it.
What it is that you're talking about is a totally different genre of programs. Yes, I mean if you have a total live output in real time from a habitat where there's a load of crocodiles, then maybe you can do that. But that is not available to us at the moment. Can I just add a cautionary tale?
10 years, though, it's going to be
well, maybe. Let me say a cautionary tale. Chuck and a couple of other people will be aware of this story. But 20 years ago, when David Attenborough was still he's director of programs in the BBC. Just previous to that, he'd been out to the Pacific to do a zoo quest from certainly from Vanuatu. And while he was on Vanuatu, he filmed these the precursors to bungee jumpers. They build these towers, tie vines to their ankles and leap off the tower, and then the vine pulls tight just before they splat into the ground. I mean, it's a form of sort of macho, sort of male activity. He filmed this, and it was edited as part of the program. Wonderful sequence it was. And he was then approached by a couple of scientists from our Ministry of Transport who were looking at the kind of decelerations that the human body can put up with. And it was part of a study on anchorage points in cars for safety belts. They said they wanted to see this film, so Attenborough set them up in a cutting room, and they had their stopwatches there and all sorts of other things. 6 months later, David actually was sent a paper that was published in the Journal of Mechanical Science, written by these two guys, pointing out that the human body was capable of minus 10 G or whatever it was. And David suddenly realized actually what they had done. They had taken these film sequences really quite literally and would stop watching, from the time that they were flinging themselves off the top to the time that they were pulled up tight. And then individual shots, they were timing, counting the frames and so on. And what they hadn't realized was, of course, this was a film, that some of the shots were slow motion. And also, in order to, it only takes hardly less than a second for these guys to leap off the top before they're actually pulled up. Well, of course, I mean, bang, blink and you miss it. So as part of the filmmaking process, not only were there slow motion shots interpolated into the master wide, but there were other shots, to spin it all out, so that actually it took, God knows, 5 seconds, whatever it was. And the whole of their scientific sort of conclusions actually were invalid. Well, David wrote and said, just a minute, I didn't realise you were going to do this, and surely you understand that slow motion. They were absolutely furious, because they then had to retract this scientific paper, and probably our anchorage points in our British cars are probably now. but that shows you one of the dangers, I think, of using film for that reason.
Yeah, another danger is that teachers right now are taking films made by Dow Chemical and teaching kids about wildlife. And like it or not, that's what's happening in the schools. They're taking lousy films and teaching kids with them. And I think we have to look at it from that perspective, and we aren't looking at it from that perspective. But I getting back to, you were wondering what's going on in the United States, why are we so different? I guess my comment on that is, some of you heard this before, but it's white male global corporate America values, and we want you to have them too.
I think the biggest thing that worries me about sort of macho wildlife films is that people get bored with real wildlife. I think that if that's people's main exposure, is sitting in front of the TV and watching films like this, you begin to imagine that all of wildlife is really as exciting as that. And then when you go out to a park in your car and you walk around for a few minutes and you don't see very much exciting, then you think, well, gee, this isn't very much exciting. I'll just go back to my car and then go home and watch the TV. And I don't know how to fix that. I mean, you can't just make a film that's really the way it is, but one somehow needs to try more.
Sorry.
I'd like to make a comment on violence. Some of you might have seen our National Geographic special, Lion and Hyenas. And that was probably one of our most violent films that we've made. Lots of predation sequences. And one of the reasons we did the show is because we thought it was a dramatic story, and it was a great group of filmmakers that were going to be working on the project. It got probably our highest ratings ever. But all the same, there was an incredible backlash. We received lots of letters, and there were lots of articles written about the violence in TV. And I think that's something that we paid a lot of attention to and that we're listening. So there is a responsibility of the filmmaker, but there's also things that the public and the audience can do in general to say, look, we have a problem with this, or is this absolutely necessary, or is it a bit gratuitous, or whatever.
I'd like to just respond to a couple of comments. One, first, Chuck, this live television that you've already described, that's been done. John, you'll be familiar with this. At the Discovery Channel, we worked on live from the Serengeti with you on the wildebeest migration, and then we also did live from the Red Sea. Actually, wildlife in real time, just like archaeology, is quite boring, and it failed miserably for us. I think it did quite well for you. It did all right for us, but I don't think it's anything we're going to be doing in the near future again. I think you may overestimate the power of television right now. Undoubtedly, it is an incredibly powerful medium, influencing people unbelievably. It's wonderful, and it can be used for good or it can be used for bad. But I just wanted to relate one story. Prior to joining Discovery, I had the opportunity to work on a project with the BBC in the mid-'80s. It was called Television on Trial. It was a documentary series that only the BBC would undertake, and it was about the social ills of television. It asked questions like, does television cause violence? Does it inhibit children's ability to learn? Does it desensitize us to the terrors of the world, watching the space shuttle blow up over and over again or seeing war scenes? And in a nutshell, the answer was, television is like food. You are what you eat, but you also have the power to turn it off. And I think in the case of wildlife films, we need to go a little bit further. I think it is true that we do need to base our programming on scientific fact. We take extra steps at Discovery Channel to have a staff of 8 researchers who research in depth every film that we're not involved with from a co-production or original production standpoint, but to go back, let's say we have a wildlife biologist to go in and investigate all the points of a film. And its accuracy. So I think we're trying to maintain television that is accurate but entertaining, informative and yet entertaining. And I think that's the only decree any network in the U.S. can have, is to try and maintain that integrity.
Yeah, and I'd repeat, I'm not picking on a guy doing it right, but there's a lot of people aren't doing it right, and there's a lot of categories that are way behind other categories. But, you know, I'm not only a biologist, I'm a research biologist, and researchers are always out of step with everyone else, because we're not worrying about today's problem, we're worrying about a problem that can happen 20 years from now. We can start collecting a database on it, so when the time comes, we've got a solution, you know, which automatically means we're not only out of step with everyone else, but we also spend a lot of time gazing off into the distance. It's like this lady was married to a poet. She said he never works, all he does is sit there and looking out the window. And researchers are always doing that, so I'll admit to that disease. So I'm worried about on down the line. Yeah.
I think I'm gonna disagree with the idea that sort of wildlife and nature is boring, or however people say it. I mean, to me, and I think I've learned this by going out with people who are real knowledgeable over time, and I take people on like wetlands walks and ride on the outside bike rides and stuff like that, that you can go out in places, and if you sort of know the stories and you know what to listen for, and you know what's behind what's happening, that you can walk out of your car in this place and stop and
Yeah, no,
listen.
I
I think
agree with
that
that. Agree with that.
becomes-
I have no problem with that at all. Yeah,
But
yeah,
now you're trying to market it though for a mass audience
Yeah.
that is not
Yeah,
inherently interested. And I think, that's part of this whole violence issue, that the pendulum, I think it'll probably soften over time to some extent. The pendulum has swung from where wildlife films were for this very, very select PBS type audience. And now wildlife and conservation has become very hot and very popular. And so, how are you gonna market it? And you're gonna say that, for a long time, I think people have seen wildlife and nature as very gentle and always very fair. And I mean, it's not that way. So they said, commercial filmmakers said, there's something for us to seize on. The society is beginning to be interested in wildlife, and it's really more violent. So now the pendulum has swung that way. I mean, for the people who would choose to go on a bike ride or a walk, they're by nature interested. But now you see, like wildlife filmmaking is going out to this mass commercial audience. So how are you going to bring them in? And I think eventually it's going to soften up.
Just in case you misunderstood me, let's say, I'm not saying that natural history is boring. I wouldn't be sitting here now as a wildlife filmmaker. But I will confide with you. I will confide with you one thing, and that was the first time that I went to the Serengeti. I was actually disappointed, because I'd been brought up on years and years of Armand and Michaela Dennis on safari and all this action, and you couldn't drive for 3 days across the Serengeti and see virtually nothing. No, what we're talking about is being there and is one kind of experience which is actually wonderful. But what we're talking about is actually, effectively marketing films about nature in a competitive situation on a multi-channel situation. How do we grab people? That's what I'm talking about. Sorry.
I was interested in the Time Life film comment, and also in Super Predators that I watched in this series, and it points up the point, the observation that was made back here, matter of balance. In the Super Predators, I felt that there was not nearly enough emphasis given to the ultimate super predator in balance with the animal, the four-footed kind, that it could have been done much better, I thought, for balance. And it brought to mind again this NRA type of attitude toward violence in wildlife that seems to be pointed up so much with the Time Life film. And I feel that it's very essential to get back to balance, to get away from that super macho approach. It really terribly offends me.
I think I could make a film which is total killing from beginning to end. But it depends on the story. I mean, if you've got a story which is going to take predation or fighting or one of these other sort of high sort of impact activities that animals engage in, and if you're going to do a story which in fact helps to illuminate that, then you're going to end up with a film with a lot of what we've been talking about in it. But it's a matter of balance usually, and very often I think what is happening is that you've got a much more general story, but there's a lot of emphasis much more than you would expect, on these high impact activities. So it depends on the story. But I accept your point.
There's lots of different stories. I just love what you said about why not do, could be a love story. Hey, that's another category.
Yeah. Yeah.
In this festival, we really try to deal with that. We'll take a war and peace type thing that National Film Board makes, but also Scrump. They both fit there in a category. A lot of festivals don't do that. We're trying.
I'd just like to comment on educational films in the use in the classroom. I'm a biology professor, and I see sort of three different levels of reality here. And I teach marine biology, and there is the actual reality when you take students out into the field to the seashore, and you never see any glazed over looks with them. They're always excited, enthusiastic. And then there's a first step away from reality, where you try and bring some creatures into the laboratory and have them work with that, and you start to get a little bit of loss of attention and kind of glazed over look. And then there's this second step away from reality, which is showing them films and videos. And that's where you get a lot of students falling asleep in glazed over looks. And I have strong feelings on that, because I got subjected to so many documentaries and well-intentioned nature documentaries when I was going through classes and things like that. And I think they're being severely misused nowadays in educational systems. And I have a friend who's a book distributor for high school science classes, and she says that she goes around and 50% of the classrooms when she visits them are showing documentaries that are well-intentioned, but a lot of the students are just, they're glazed over. And I see it in my classes when I put these things on nowadays. And I really wonder if that's maybe a more serious error to err on the side of boredom than on the side of outlandishness.
Sounds like you're.
No, I didn't quite catch that last remark. What was it?
I said it's possibly a more serious error to err on the side of boring students with giving them well-intentioned documentaries that just don't hold their attention after a while, and cause them to begin to think that some of these topics are not as interesting as they really are. And also just allowing teachers more and more to spend half of their time just showing films and videos. I know myself in my classes, it's certainly easy to just show a film instead of preparing a lecture for the day.
I mean, it seems to me that any teacher that falls back on videos is an appalling teacher. I mean, full stop. I mean, because
It's happening a lot.
Well,
and that's definitely
well, don't blame me for it. I mean,
Isn't it a
we do get quite a lot of letters from teachers in England saying, when are you going to repeat such and such a program? I use it for my classroom and I missed it first time round. So which you're not supposed to do anyway.
Do you talk to the students and ask them how effective it is?
Well, yeah, it's not my. I have to say, it's not my problem. I mean, we get good audiences. I work for the British Licence Fee Payer. We get good audiences for our shows. If our programs are packaged for educational uses, and quite separate films are made from our offcuts and from bits and pieces of our programs specifically for the teaching, but in an ideal world, the films which we are making should not be used in the classroom. A, they're too long and they're boring. Most of our educational films, which are made from our material on the BBC, are probably about 10 minutes long. It's rather less than that. Actually, Derek, you'd know that. Yeah, about 10 minutes long, which is more the attention span necessary for a classroom, I'd have thought.
I think a lot of the problem, though, is, when I took courses at U of M back when, let's go on a field trip. Who's got cars today? 3, 4 people, raise their hand, off we go. You can't do that when you got 200, 300, so you end up showing a video.
So, can I just make a couple of comments? One is that I think I'm having a love affair with biologists too, with the scientists of this world. I've had close relationships with lots of scientists all my life. I don't believe a lot of what they say. I think they're really questioning it. You see they're the guys with the white hats all the time, whether they be male or female. That's, and I, you really, I think we've really got to watch some of that. They tend to have, they do tend to look at the left back leg of a grasshopper for 14 years.
About 10 years ago, I had the same conversation with Alan Root. I finally said, Alan, for Christ's sake, I'm not talking about you. You're a damn good biologist. I'm talking about the filmmakers out there who don't seek any knowledge. They just make a film and it's all wrong. Those are the ones I'm after.
And anyhow, my next comment is, I think we should ban all these macho mammal films, absolutely, utterly, right out of all the systems, and that means we'll have to make films in places like Australia then.
Has the thylacine just been rediscovered, isn't it?
No macho mammals in Australia, I guess.
Absolutely not, including the humans.
Well, one last comment. White male global corporate America is leading us all over that great buffalo jump in the sky. I think a lot of the problem is population, and a lot of it is just this Western fat cat values. And we hurt animals. We're also hurting most of the people in the world. And that part, I don't know how we're going to fix that. We're over time, I think, but doesn't bother me. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Thank you. Let's go.